What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is Justin Boone. Boone, what's going on, buddy? I hope semifinal week treated you well. Hope you're moving on to some championships. You look great, Santa hat and all. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, we're also rocking, I don't know if we can get it, the I Still Believe shirt here, which, I mean, after yesterday, maybe not so much, but I'm trying to force it here. Feeling good, man. Feeling really good. We finally made it to championship week, and I'm sure, like most people, the season just flies by here. But I'll be honest, like for me, it feels like we just started doing this. Like it's been a quite the change for me this year, joining Yahoo, and now we're at the end of the main fantasy season already. And yes, I do have teams making it through the fantasy semifinals, but certainly not as many as I had hoped. And I would blame my guy, Josh Allen. I would also blame Trey McBride, but we're going to talk about those guys. We're going to talk about some of the disappointing players that let people down this week and some very shocking ones. Some people who probably thought, like me, that they were in a great position having the number one fantasy quarterback and the number one fantasy tight end. And it did not work out that way this week, Harmon.
Man. Them's just the breaks sometimes. That's the way it is in fantasy football. And that is what we're going to be doing here on today's show. We're opening up the fantasy football trust meter here in the fantasy postseason to kind of break down some of those players that maybe let you down last week. And do we believe in what they're going to be able to do in week 17? So first segment of the show, we'll put through the trust meter stars that disappointed us. Some of those players we were just discussing here in the second segment. Then we're going to look at the week 16 surging players. Can we buy into what they did last week? Third segment, those are the fantasy headaches. Some guys that might be giving you a little bit of pain in the brain. In the fourth segment, we'll look at waiver wire selections if you're still looking to make some moves heading into your fantasy football championship. So with that, let's fire up the post week 16 fantasy playoff trust meter.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. I just hope we can win a game.
That's what we're all trying to do, Jim. We're trying to win some games here. The fantasy playoff trust meter is all about determining if the guys that we've been relying on or some of those players, like I mentioned, that are surging lately or let us down one way or another, deciding if we can trust them as we head into week 17. Reminder for the folks out there, we've got 4 tiers in the trust meter. Full trust. That's, this is going to be, it's going to be okay this week. Some trust, you think it's going to be okay this week. No trust, could go either way. We're not saying it definitely will be bad, but could go either way. And then finally, you're cooked. That's just, it's over. It's not going to happen. So let's jump into some stars that were disappointing in week 16, starting with whether we're going to believe here, Justin Boone. Let's talk about Josh Allen, who had his worst fantasy game since his rookie year in a game in which he started and finished. So where are we at on Josh Allen? The Bills offense, give me the temperature check for Bills Nation here and those of us who may have him in fantasy going into week 17.
Well, I feel like I'm a little more calm than maybe I was 24 hours ago when the games were happening and we were seeing some of these results. So I'm a little more zen now. I've had time to think it through. We can come at this with a clear head. But still, it's only some trust. Normally, with a guy like Allen, we would bounce right back. We would say full trust. It was one bad game. It was a weird scenario. I talked about it last week, how they came off that win over the Patriots, very emotional. Then they go to Cleveland and they kind of just did what they needed to do just to get a win there. It was kind of ugly, let's face it. And it could have gone Allen's way. I mean, they had some rushing touchdowns. He had that touchdown where Dawson Knox was wide open by himself, the ball right in his hands, and he dropped it. So easily we could have seen that stat line change a little bit. And yet we have news that he's now day-to-day with this foot injury. Sounds like he's still going to play this week, but he's dealing with a little something there. He has a much tougher matchup this week. He's going against the Eagles defense. We know how good they are, so that's going to be a little tougher for sure. And the weather could be a problem in this game. And it's early in the week, obviously, but we're going to monitor this one. Right now, the forecast is looking like the weather might be a bit of a problem. That could turn things into more of a running affair. So I think there is some reason to look at Josh Allen and question whether he is that top fantasy play this week or whether we're going to bump him down a little bit. Very tough to sit him in the championship week. Just like last week, I had some teams where I had Joe Burrow and I had Josh Allen, and that is a tough decision to bench Josh Allen. I obviously wish I would have done it, but I didn't on any of those squads. So yeah, we're looking at it this week as him being probably a few spots at least lower than where he normally would be coming off of this game, coming off a couple down weeks over the last 4 or 5 games. And just having this injury and a tough matchup and some weather's a few things kind of mounting up against him here, Harmon.
Yeah, the other thing I would note with this Eagles defense, they've been one of the best units in terms of limiting tight end production. They're a top 3 team at defending the tight end. And to me, I think one of the problems with the Bills last week, like at this point, we know the wide receivers are not going to give them anything. I mean, the Josh Palmer, Brandon Cooks kind of weird Frankenstein room they've got going there. We know what that is. It's going to be Khalil Shakir doing his stuff underneath and nothing happening down the football field. But you got to hope that that tight end room, which I think can be dynamic at times with Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid when/if he's ever fully healthy, and Jackson Hawes as a mostly a blocker. But you got to hope that that room comes together. That's going to be tough against Philadelphia, which has been one of the better teams limiting production to that position. So that's another thing maybe working against Josh Allen here. I will say if you have Josh Allen in fantasy, you got to feel, hey, you made it to week 17. You got to feel like the luck is really on your side, man. I mean, if you made it through this past week, you got to think, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm the team of destiny. That would be the only sort of, silver lining I'd give you after what happened in week 16.
Yeah, I mean, not to talk too much about our fantasy teams, but I know I do have one squad where I'm already through, even though Josh Allen was at QB, and I got 2 more tonight that, depending on the results, I might make it through with Josh Allen on the team. So, yeah, and then that's going to come down to some options, right? Like, who else do I have on those teams, and are any of them even remotely in the conversation where you could consider Josh Allen? You'd have to be talking about, like, a top 5 fantasy QB, though. We're not pushing this guy much further than that because we know he can, even in bad weather, right? He can run the ball. He can score short touchdowns. He can still do it all. And in this Browns game, he didn't have to be Superman because they kind of got out to that lead. They controlled it for the most part, got a little tight in the second half, but overall they did what they had to do to get the win there. And it was just sort of a really bad, perfect storm for Josh Allen's fantasy value in week 16. And I feel bad for anybody out there that didn't make it through, even though they had Josh Allen on their squad, because he has been fantastic for most of the season.
All right, let's get to the next one here. Very similar. It is a onesie position. It is the best player at the position. Trey McBride, Arizona Cardinals tight end. I talked about it on the recap show with Chris Allen, just the stuff of nightmares last week where not only do you get a bad game from Trey McBride where he drops a pass in the end zone. He is very limited from a production standpoint. The number 2 tight end, Elijah Higgins, who I think actually was a collegiate wide receiver, so he's one of these, kind of move hybrid players. He goes off in this game, just insult to injury here, and the injury being your fantasy football playoffs were dashed last week. So where are we at with the trust meter for Trey McBride heading into week 17?
It's hard for me to say this because we're making me relive what I went through yesterday with a bunch of these Allen McBride teams, like I said, but I think we're going right back to full trust. I mean, he's been so consistent all season long. And then it comes back to this matchup, right? The Falcons have been decent against tight ends this year, so that matchup wasn't necessarily the best for him, but you figured because it was McBride, he was still going to get there. But now this week, it's the Bengals. Everything's going to be fine. They're the best fantasy matchup. How many times have we talked about this, Harmon? They're giving up almost 5 more fantasy points per game than the next closest defense. So it's this is like an actual perfect storm going in the right direction now for McBride this week. He doesn't have the same concerns that Allen has with a tough matchup, with weather, all that sort of stuff. It is actually looking really good on paper, on top of the fact that, like I said, he has just been so consistent this season. So I don't have any concerns. Do you have any about him this week?
No, I have no concerns at all for Trey McBride this week. Truly, if you made it through with Trey McBride, congratulations, and you're just going to play him. You're not going to make some panic move and, I don't know, pick up Jawan Johnson or something like that and start him over Trey McBride. Just not going to happen. The other thing that's worth mentioning with the whole, Arizona Cardinals and Trey McBride having this disappointing game, Jacoby Brissett dropped back 33 times in this game, which is which is crazy low for him. His dropbacks have been over 40 in every single game except 2 this year. Last week against the Falcons, and then his one win as a starter against the Dallas Cowboys all the way back in week 9. He's consistently pushing over 50 in certain spots. If not, he's just over 40 every single time. And, obviously this matchup this week against the Bengals could get pretty wild, right? I mean, if the Bengals are able to put up points on this defense, which they certainly should, this should be a script where Jacoby Brissett is dropping back a lot, which will just mean more opportunities for Trey McBride and all those other pass catchers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is like how I said with Allen, that normally you would want to just rely on the fact that it's such an elite player and that he'll be fine. I think McBride is certainly still in that scenario. There's not really much of a reason to shy away from him. And I think you make a great point. Like, who is that player that you're actually going to play over Trey McBride, who has been so elite? I think he's going to be the kind of player who is actually going to help people win fantasy championships. I think we're going to see a monster game from him in this matchup. I'm not worried at all.
All right, these next 3 I think will be a little bit trickier conversations to unpack than those 2, because ultimately, you're not going to bench Josh Allen. You're not going to bench Trey McBride in your fantasy football championships. They're onesie positions. You're not going to get some, joker off the waiver wire to just slot in and going to get a better projection on those 2 guys. You might potentially have some lineup decisions to make for these next 3 players, starting with Josh Jacobs, Green Bay Packers running back. A lot going on here with Josh Jacobs. We don't know, his status in terms of his health. We also don't know the status of the quarterback, Jordan Love, whether he's going to play in what is a Saturday, December 27th game at 8 p.m. Eastern, a Peacock game. Not to mention that as well. So Josh Jacobs, where's he at on the trust meter this week?
I'm curious if you're going to push back on this at all. And I definitely a few weeks ago would not have thought I'd be saying this, but I'm going with you're cooked, bro. Like, we saw him last week try to battle through this. He's trying to fight through these injuries, and normally he does it, right? He keeps playing. We have to commend him for that. It's incredible that he gets out there, even that he was playing last week after all the talk about how he was on crutches early in the week, and yet he still manages to get out there for the game and play. And yet this might have been the first time where he didn't look great. Like, he wasn't very efficient in that game. And of course, there were other issues, the quarterback situation, like you mentioned, but he didn't look great in that game. And it doesn't help that Emmanuel Wilson starts to get more touches and he was performing better. And you wonder at this point, like, do the Packers actually have to force him to sit down and say, you got to rest up? We have other aspirations here. Like, you're not actually helping the team by trying to fight through this. I wonder if that's the case. The bigger frustrating part here is that I don't think we're going to get any sort of clear directive on it, because we're going to have to wait all week long again. There's going to be all the talk where he's probably not practicing, but he's going to try to battle through it. And maybe late in the week, we will find out whether he is going to play or not. That's unfortunate. That puts us in a really tough spot. And not to spoil the waiver wire section at all, but Emmanuel Wilson is someone that if he's out there in your league, you got to be trying to get him, because he's kind of maybe flying under the radar a little bit versus some of the other pickups this week, because we don't have anything definitive right now on Josh Jacobs. And yet, if we find out at any point that Jacobs isn't going to play this week, Emmanuel Wilson becomes a really strong RB2 with legitimate RB1 upside for fantasy here. So I think it's an unfortunate situation to see him, banged up like this. He's been really, really good for most of the year in fantasy, been really, really good kind of as like the engine of that Packers offense. And yet right now he's just breaking down too much to be that, on top of the fact that we don't know what the quarterback situation is really going to entail there. So it's not a great situation by any means for fantasy managers, because we don't know for sure at the moment. And yet I look at this one and I say the Emmanuel Wilson rosters that I have where he's sitting on the bench, I'm kind of excited because I think he could get a shot to start this week.
I think it's very live that he potentially starts this game, does Emmanuel Wilson. And I agree with you. Wilson looked good, whereas Jacobs, I think, like, let's be honest, he hasn't been super efficient all season. And some of that is not totally Josh Jacobs' fault or anything. The offensive line has been very hit or miss. I don't think they've looked great in terms of the blocking all season long. And yet I think Jacobs has clearly played diminished at times this year, which again is a huge testament to him for being a warrior and being a badass and getting out there. He's talked about he loves this team. He takes a lot of pride in being out there if he can be out there. Well, at some point, you're out there in name only and you're not effective. Yeah. And this is sort of going to be a tough thing, I think, for us to talk about in the next few weeks here, Boone, when we talk about, obviously this is all that matters for fantasy championships, so most of them are week 17. But if you're, doing any sort of like DFS in week 18 or prop bets, or you do have a championship because you love pain that goes into week 18, the motivation for teams this year is a little bit tricky to unpack here, because for the most part, these playoff teams, the guys who are going to go to the postseason, are for the most part, I'm not going to say it's done and it's settled, but we're pretty close to locked in for a lot of these teams. The question is just seeding. I mean, the Packers, according to The Athletic, have a 97% chance to make the playoffs. They have an 11% chance to win the division. Like the Bears are probably winning the NFC North. So I think that gets difficult to sort of predict. Like, yeah, could they say to Josh Jacobs, rest up here in week 17 so that you're ready for the playoffs? You're 100% for the playoffs. To me, it seems kind of crazy because technically they're not mathematically clinched, right? But at the same time, if the odds are at a point where you're probably not, going to lose your playoff spot to the freaking Lions or the Bucks or something like that, why would you not just want to rest them up here? That's going to be a trickier conversation than normal for us to unpack just because of the way the playoff field looks this year.
And knowing, too, the kind of player that he is, the leader that he is on that team. And it's not just this year that he's played through injuries. He's done this throughout his career, and he's normally performed pretty well. But I think we're just getting to a point of attrition where he can't keep doing this. He just doesn't have enough left in the tank here. He's got to recover a little bit. It's like a video game character, right? Like, what's the percentage right now on Josh Jacobs' health? Like, I feel like we're getting down to like 25%. He's got to find some health packs. He's got to get himself back up to a point where he can actually contribute in a meaningful way for this team. As much as fantasy managers might not want to hear that, but if you had him in your lineup last week, you might not be moving on right now because of the way that he played in that game. So you look at Emmanuel Wilson, and again, I don't want to spoil too much about what we're going to talk about in the waiver wire section, but he's had 4 contests this year where he's played at least 40% of the snaps. He's put up 87 yards, 49 yards and a touchdown, 125 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then this past week, 82 yards. So he's shown that he can perform well when he gets into a bigger role. When you have a guy like that you do have some faith in, why not let him take over for a week or so and let Josh Jacobs heal up? It's not like they have a running back room that's just completely bare. They have no one else to go to. They have to keep putting Josh Jacobs out there. They can rely on these other guys like Wilson. I even like Chris Brooks as well. I know he's dealt with some injuries recently too, but he's another player who, when he's gotten opportunities, he's performed pretty well. So let these other guys handle the load for a week or two. And I'm sure there are Josh Jacobs managers out there going, no, what are you talking about? Don't even put this in the Packers' head. Yeah, not at all. And yet I would be more worried. And I have Josh Jacobs teams. I have a team tonight that if things go well, it's going to advance with Josh Jacobs. But I'm going to feel worried about putting him in my lineup next week if this is the version of Josh Jacobs that we're getting right now. So that's why, for me, it's pushed me all the way to your Cook Pro, because I don't think 1 week is going to make a huge difference in terms of his health. I don't think we're going to see anything close to the high-end version of him in week 17, and that's going to put fantasy managers in a really tough spot.
So, bottom line perspective here before we move on. Let's say Malik Willis starts this game, and that's what's going to happen here. Right now, it's a 40.5 projected point total for this game. So pretty low scoring. Like, it is a potential Malik Willis versus Tyler Huntley backup bowl there on Saturday night, which, man, the NFL's got to be loving all these backup quarterbacks on their Christmas and Saturday slate here. They got to be just overjoyed about that. Okay, so let's just say Malik Willis starts and Josh Jacobs plays. What are you advised? Like, would you say to people, like, you can sit Josh Jacobs? Like, where do you think, just ballpark kind of ranking range for him this week?
I mean, we know he's a guy that can give you 60 and a TD even in a bad week sometimes. So he still has to be in like that mid to low end RB2 conversation. And then that would push Emmanuel Wilson down into like the RB3 flex kind of area. But yeah, I would be looking long and hard at my other options if he does end up playing. And then if he doesn't play, like I said, that it's a wheels up on Wilson, and you're actually really excited to have him in your lineup.
Breaking news into the show right now. NFL Network's Tom Pelissero reports that DK Metcalf has been suspended for 2 games for the altercation with the Lions fan. Not shocked that this is obviously Metcalf could potentially appeal, whatever. We'll see what happens. He does plan to appeal, according to Pelissero. So the only thing I would say that is interesting to discuss with this, because obviously, hey, here's the deal: if you had DK Metcalf, he's suspended, you're cooked, bro. There, but the other thing, and I don't think there's anybody like, oh yeah, I'm itching to get Adam Thielen in my lineup against the Browns in Week 17 or something. You can just probably ignore the Steelers' passing game from your fantasy football equation. Now that DK Metcalf's not playing. The only interesting thing though is that the Ravens really need the Browns to upset the Steelers in Week 17. I don't know if Metcalf's absence is enough to say, like, because the Steelers are just such a funky team anyways, could they just not throw the ball to Kenny Gainwell 10 times and get the tight ends involved, and that's what they just kind of cobble together offense? I have no idea. They beat Shedeur Sanders and the boys that way. But that's the only interesting thing I have to say out of this, is that it does at least make the Ravens' miracle playoff push to win the AFC North as they play again in Week 18. It makes it a little bit more live than I probably thought it was, 24 hours ago.
Yeah, I mean, overall, this is it's such a dumb situation. And I say that as a Metcalf manager as well, but it's just, the whole thing just seems so foolish. And it's unfortunate that we can't really turn to many guys in this offense and go, okay, well, now this guy's getting an opportunity, like you're saying, like Marcus Valdez-Scantling. There's no way you're going to go to any of those other receivers. So then it just comes back to the backfield again. Even the tight ends, I don't know that I'd feel that strongly about it. I think they can still get the win, because that's exactly how the Bills just got the win, right? They didn't get that much from their receivers, and they managed to get out of there with a win. But if you look at the backfield, Kenny Gainwell has been fantastic. Double-digit fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 games, over 120 yards each of the past 2 here. I think he's going to get even more targets now, assuming that Metcalf's suspension actually holds. He is the engine of this offense, like I was talking about with Josh Jacobs. He's a borderline RB2, but he is going to be pushing for RB1 value. I think I'll keep him in the RB2 range. But the Browns' run defense as well, early in the season, remember, this was a matchup that we would often shy away from running backs. We downgrade them. Not anymore. They've let a running back go over 20 fantasy points in 3 straight games. Would you be shocked if we see 2 running backs in this game go over 20 fantasy points? We could see Gainwell and Warren just get a ton of work in this one. So yeah, I think you feel really good about playing those 2. But overall, yeah, just a really foolish situation from basically everybody involved.
Yeah, it's just so funny that I remember talking on the George Pickens breaking news reaction show. I was like, his range of outcomes, George Pickens, is probably he has a monster season to Dallas to he's suspended at some point this season. Like, those are the range of outcomes. And it's actually the guy that's replacing George Pickens is now suspended 2 games for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The irony is just so thick here. Kenny Gainwell, we can just put him through the trust meter right now, because we were going to do him in the running back section after the break here. And yeah, I think this one is an easy full trust. You mentioned it there. For sure. Just a couple stats on Kenneth Gainwell. He was 3rd on the team in routes. It went DK Metcalf 89% of the routes, MVS 58%, insane statement to say. Kenny Gainwell 56%, and he was targeted on 28% of those routes, which is actually somehow higher than his season average before that. He averaged 3 yards per route run, does Kenny Gainwell. I mean, he has been, obviously had that one long catch there, but he's in the slot on like 16% of his snaps. That's always the trope in mini camps, or we're gonna get our running back in the slot. Kenny Gainwell's actually doing that type of stuff. It's just absurd. 6.6 air yards per target. In this is a great meme we're showing here on the screen. Yeah, I think Kenny Gainwell is a full trust player for me. And I've got him in a PPR lineup, and he's been over like 19 points in back-to-back games. So just definitely somebody I completely trust.
Yeah, and we always try to figure out like who are going to be those players that kind of step up during the fantasy playoffs that we remember like years down the road, like, oh, that was the Tajay Spears season like last year, right? Where he just had 3 really big games in the fantasy playoffs, sort of out of nowhere. We knew the talent was there, but he gets the opportunity late in the season and he blows up with it. This could really be like the Kenny Gainwell playoffs, where if you have him, he's the one getting you through. he's the one getting you to the fantasy championship and potentially taking a trophy home.
What a world. What a statement to say, and yet I completely buy everything Boone just said there. Okay, let's finish up this segment of the fantasy stars who disappointed us last week. Let's talk about Drake London, who in his return was targeted on just under 28% of his routes, ran a route on over 80% of the dropbacks, and yet did not put up a good performance. What is your trust level with Drake London?
No trust, and no trust to almost borderline you're cooked, bro. And it's only because we have one game left in the fantasy season. Like, I wouldn't feel this way if this was week 6 and we knew he had a little bit of a runway in order to come back and get back to full health. But he's just the latest guy who's come back from one of these PCL injuries and hasn't really looked the same in his first game back, hasn't been productive. And like I said, he's only got 2 games here in the fantasy season to do something. The first one, he did not perform. And now how can you have any confidence here with him in your lineup the rest of the way? He's still a great receiver. He can still score a touchdown at any time, but 3 catches for 29 yards at 8 targets, that is not going to cut it. So he'll still be, it's sort of like the Josh Jacobs thing. Like, he's so good that when he's in the lineup, you still have to consider him as like a top 20, top 24 option, because he's going to have opportunities. He's going to get volume, and you hope that he finds the end zone. And yet I'm not going to be starting him with any sort of confidence this week based on what we saw in that last game.
Yeah, my one Drake London team that I had left was cooked last week. Shout out to Sigmund Bloom, who beat me in the Apex. Well, listen, I'm currently leading the matchup by less than 10 points, and he has Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle going on Monday night. So I am going to go ahead and assume that that Sigmund Bloom has beat me.
Keep the hope, Harmon. Keep the hope.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll get to Ashton Jeanty later on. He started Ashton Jeanty against me, and I paid for some of my coping corner comments with Ashton Jeanty. I paid for it in my own fantasy blood and sweat there on that one. But anyway, so I don't have to worry about this. My Drake London team is cooked at this point. But I think remember the designation of no trust here. This could go either way this week. And I think that really, it's perfectly said. If Drake London goes out there and has another slow game and it's Kyle Pitts and it's Bijan Robinson, that wouldn't surprise me, just like it did last week. And yet Drake London, as you mentioned, is a great player. It's a very high scoring potential game here on Monday night against the Los Angeles Rams. The final game of the fantasy football. That might move the needle for me here, in that, you might know at that point, because there's so many games, do you need that kind of Monday night hammer? Do you need that upside swing? Then you probably play Drake London. I just know that, my God, if I lost a fantasy matchup and Drake London was on my bench and I had to watch that thing on Monday night as he scores 2 touchdowns against a secondary with the Rams that can be vulnerable, I probably would. I couldn't, because this is my job. I would opt out of playing next year. I would be so miserable. I don't know if I could take it.
Well, and you can tell based on the way I'm rating them here in the meter that I'm saying no trust and not going fully you're cooked, bro, because a week could make a difference for him, right? Like, maybe a week coming back from this PCL injury, maybe he does look better, where Josh Jacobs is a guy that I don't think a week is going to make a difference for him. So yeah, fingers crossed that we get some positive reports about London, that the beat writers are saying he looks better in practice, and we can have a little more faith. But right now, I just don't have it early in the week.
Well, I will say, Boone, shout out to you. Big time scouting brain on some of those practice clips. You were saying, I don't like the way Drake London looks in these practice clips. I don't like the way Marvin Harrison Jr. looks at some of these practice clips. And guess what? I didn't like the way they looked in that game. So yeah,
give me 30 seconds of shaky footage, and I'll let you know.
That is where you cook, baby. Forget the fantasy film room. Give Justin Boone a couple of shaky footage about 30 seconds of practice. That's where he's going absolutely ham there. Yeah, and listen, this is a reminder. Again, you can be out there in name and not out there in game, and I think we saw that for both of those wide receivers in that particular game. Final one we'll talk about here in this segment: Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Detroit Lions. Jared Goff throws the ball over 50 times. St. Brown did not have a big game, most notably, obviously, the offensive pass interference on the final play. We also got some potential bad news here today. He was listed as a non-participant in practice because the Lions obviously have to do a walkthrough because they have the Christmas game coming up here. So trust level on Amon-Ra St. Brown.
I mean, we'll have to pay attention to the injury situation there. I'm not super concerned about it yet. So it's full trust for me. Like, unless that injury turns out to be something that's a little scarier, which I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't really think, unless we get some new information, that it's going to cost him any time here. So other than that, I mean, he had one game where he left because he got hurt, and that was in week 13. Other than that, over the last month or so, 149 and a touchdown in week 12, 92 in week 14, 164 and 2 touchdowns just 2 weeks ago, Harmon. Like, I think this is one where people are overreacting to, I would say, like, sort of a down game. Like, he still had 54 yards. Like, this isn't even one of those like one catch 8-yard performances. He still gave you something, but the matchup with the Vikings too, on paper, it looks bad, but his last 4 games against Minnesota, 97 yards, 77 yards, 112 and a TD, and 144 and a TD. So to me, the injury situation is the only thing that we need to monitor. Other than that, I think the Sun God's going to be fine. You're going to be happy to have him in your lineup as one of the best wide receiver plays in the fantasy championship.
Yeah, and obviously one of the big reasons that has here in terms of, why does he have these big games against the Vikings? The Vikings lead the NFL in blitz rate this year, 47%. And when Jared Goff faces the blitz, Amon-Ra St. Brown is targeted on 35% of his routes this year. And that's like a multi-year trend. When the blitz comes, it's fine number 14, and I think that's going to happen a lot in this game. St. Brown's one of the best zone-beating receivers in the NFL. The Vikings play a bunch of zone coverage. So, yeah, this one to me almost goes right back. Other than the injury designation, he almost kind of is a Josh Allen, Trey McBride level player where I'm just going to eat what happened in Week 16, forget about it, and just put him right back in my starting lineup. That's how I'd feel about Amon-Ra St. Brown. It sounds like we are in lockstep on that one. All right, we are going to go to a quick break here. When we come back, we pivot to some running backs and wide receivers that you may or may not be able to trust. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we're back. Now we're moving into players that crushed it in Week 16. Can they keep it going here? Let's put these guys through the trust meter. We'll start with 4 running backs here. Ashton Jeanty, our first player up here, Boone. As I mentioned, I want to get this off my chest here first before we talk about Ashton Jeanty. And I've been down on the Jeanty. I was down on him as a season-long pick, kind of relative. I thought he was more of a second rounder than a first rounder, whatever. I didn't think he was going to be terrible this season. I wanted to put him in the coping corner at the end of the season, mostly because he had been disappointing relative to expectations and then faced these really tough matchups. Well, again, he threw it back in my face by eliminating one of my teams. But I want that to serve as a reminder to people, Boone. I don't want to hear ever again, this guy ruined my season. No. One pick does not ruin your season. Stop being a baby, get off your butt, and compete, okay? Put together a good team. Sigmund Bloom put together a really good team in that Apex League, despite the fact that he selected Ashton Jeanty. And you know what? He's going to eliminate me tonight when CMC – and look, obviously it's a little bit of a bizarre league that's very PPR heavy, wide receiver heavy. He zigged when everybody zags, and he went CMC and Ashton Jeanty in his first 2 picks. So maybe a little bit not a perfectly analogous situation. But nevertheless, I don't want to hear it. One player doesn't ruin your season. Compete, put together a good team, and knock off some dork like me. It can be done, okay?
Yeah, well said by you. And the Jeanty one is so weird. Like, I had him ranked low. Bizarre. I had him ranked outside of my top 24 running backs last week, to admit my fault there. And yet now, I think it's full trust. And you look at this, it makes no sense. Like, the performance last week makes no sense, but we do have some reason after that performance and looking at the matchup next week why I think we can have full trust. But first, let's recap a little bit, right? Like, the dude was under 50 scrimmage yards in his previous 2 games before this performance. The Raiders were projected for like around 12 points last week. I think it might have got as low as like 11.5. They were going against the best defense in the league in the Texans. And that's the game where he goes off for 188 yards and 2 TDs. Like, just so frustrating, so hard to predict this. Hats off to him. He is a talent. Yeah. It's great that he came through in this spot. I doubt many people other than Sig were in that position to be able to start him in the fantasy semifinals. It seems like he's one of those players that's probably helping people win their consolation leagues, depending whether you're trying to win the consolation league or whether it's the lowest score that moves on there. But here's the thing. This week, he gets the Giants now. And the weirdest part of all this is the Raiders, after the season that they've had, they're actually projected to win this game right now. And shout out to our buddy Joel Smith. He's doing great work. I've loved a lot of the stuff that he's put out for Yahoo this year. But he had a fantastic stat that in the 6 games where the Raiders have either lost by 3 or less or won, Jeanty's averaging 21.5 fantasy points per game. In the other games, 10.5 fantasy points per game. So more than double the points when the game is close or when they win. And I think this is a spot where that is going to be how it plays out. And that means, I'm all in on Jeanty this week as a high-end RB2, maybe even as that borderline low-end RB1. And just because of the way things have gone this year, he'll go right back to putting up like 30 yards this week, I'm sure, after he went off against the Texans.
What a pitiful season for the Raiders that usually when people have those stats, it's, in wins, Jonathan Taylor averages this many fantasy points. In losses, he averages this many fantasy points. For the Raiders, it's, when they only lose by like 3 points, then Ashton Jeanty, they still lose, but only when they lose by like a little bit. When they lose by a lot, that's when he's no good in fantasy. So that's just a very kind of funny twist on this Raiders season. But yeah, look, it's also a battle for the number 1 overall pick. Neither one of these teams will have any interest in getting that number 1 overall pick, but this game is going to go a long way in deciding who picks first in the draft. So that is a reason to watch this game beyond the fact that we've got some players like Ashton Jeanty in the mix here. But yeah, right now it's the Giants' pick to lose here. I'll tell you what, Joe Shane, he don't want to be picking first in the draft. And I don't know, maybe he does. Maybe he buys into these theories that they should just bail on Jackson Dart and get Fernando Mendoza. Maybe he does want to pick, but ideally the coaching staff certainly doesn't. The Raiders definitely don't want to be picking first in the draft. Pete Carroll wants to compete. He wants to have a win here to end the season. So yeah, full trust for me for Ashton Jeanty. So famous last words. Okay. Kenneth Walker, next player up here. Boone, you and I were texting.
Can we pass on this one? Do we have to talk about this?
No,
I've never used a pass on one of these shows. Can we just pass?
No, we have to talk about this. We have to talk about Kenneth Walker. You and I were texting about Kenneth Walker on Thursday night after a lively discussion as the game was going to happen a few hours later on our preview show. He ran the ball 11 times for 100 yards. He caught the ball 3 times for 64 yards. He scored a touchdown. December to remember. See, I said it was going to happen. I mean, ignore all those other games in December, but this one game in December, Justin Boone will certainly always remember what happened in Week 16 of the 2025 NFL season. So with all that, with that preamble, what's your level of trust on Kenneth Walker?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of players that I had in lineups who were great players, elite talents who didn't come through. This is one that was on all of my benches, and he finally comes through, and it makes no sense, Harmon. It's kind of like the Jeanty thing, right? He's been a letdown most of the year, was held under 5 fantasy points in Week 14, under 5 fantasy points in Week 15, the 2 weeks leading up to this. He's going against the defense that's allowing the fewest fantasy points to running backs in Week 16. And he comes through with this monster day, 164 yards and a touchdown. And now, even funnier, his 2 best games on the season have been against this Rams defense that is so good against everybody else on the ground. And yet somehow he breaks these big plays and he gets it done here. And it's no trust. I can't go you're cooked, bro, because he's shown in this game he can go off at any moment, and we always have known that that's the case. But we had the run up here where he had those down weeks, under 5 fantasy points in 2 straight games, and then goes off here. And I don't know what else to say. We've talked about this guy maybe more than anyone all season long. I still have no trust in him. This was a great performance, but he has not strung together multiple great performances very often this season. So I don't know how you could feel good about putting him in your lineup. I think you have to do it just at your own risk now. You got to make that decision based on who else you have. And I don't even know where my bias is going to lead me now. I'm so bitter. The teams that are getting through with Kenneth Walker, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to bring myself to put him into lineups this week, but he'll be in the same kind of range that he's been for a while, where he's like that high-end RB3. Zach Charbonnet also in the RB3 flex range, and we just see whether Walker can find the end zone on a big play, whether he can break a long run or a long catch, and whether Charbonnet gets the goal line work. And yeah, both these guys ended up coming through in this game. even though I'm not sure many managers had the guts to actually put them in their lineups in the semifinals, because I sure didn't.
Oh man. Okay, two things. One, there's really something to be said for if you just listen to this show, you really should watch on YouTube just to see how defeated and exasperated Justin Boone is right now while wearing the Santa hat. There's just like a real twist of irony there on that one. The other thing, man, I can't believe you're going no trust here. I think I might have some trust on Kenny Walker here in this game. It's a Panthers defense that's 24th before this week, they were 24th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, according to 4for4. They gave up some good rushing production to Bucky Irving. We'll get to Bucky Irving later on and some of the reasons why my Bucky Irving team, I don't know how I feel about him this upcoming week. We'll get to that for other reasons, but they gave up some good rushing lanes to him. And this was the best performance of the Seahawks season from an EPA per rush perspective on their running back runs. Clearly the best performance of the season. One of their 6 games with over 40% rushing success rate. So I'm not going to say that they've figured out their run game by any means, but I don't know. I might have some trust in Kenneth Walker in week 17.
I think it's got to be a little more matchup specific with the Rams. Like, I think they have something on the Rams that's working, because we saw a lot of other teams have struggled, and yet they were able to have success in these 2 matchups with the Rams. And if you want to talk to me about plus matchups, I just don't think we can play that game with Walker, because one of those 2 games where he was held under 5 fantasy points, it was a plus matchup against the Falcons. Like, you would have thought in that game that maybe he would have got it going. So he has failed in good spots this year. He's now come through in bad spots multiple times. He is very difficult to trust. And that's why, for me, it's still, I'm holding strong at no trust, but perhaps I am just a little bit bitter about this one because I feel pretty snake bitten by him all season long.
I think that's fair about the Rams point, because the way that defense is, they're very aggressive up front. And I think part of what that might be is because they are coming after Sam Darnold with some of those blitzes, that if you're able to just slip Kenneth Walker behind them, that might actually be, there might actually be something there. Yeah. I think I could buy that part of it. But like from an overall success rate standpoint, they actually didn't have that great of a game against the Rams in the first. That's actually one of their worst success rate games from a running back runs perspective. So I don't know, but from a big play perspective, that might be what it is there. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm going too far in some trust, but we're generally saying like it could go either way here for Kenneth Walker, and you got to be pretty bold to try to run it back.
Next year, I'm going to negotiate into my contract passes, where if you bring up certain players on this show, I just get to pass on them. We don't have to talk about it, and we just move forward. We need that. We need that option. I can't talk about Kenneth Walker anymore.
Well, I mean, I'm okay with it. I have literally no say in anybody's contracts or incentives or anything like that. But you know what? Tell the bosses I'm willing to greenlight that. It's good for the show. Okay, next one here. Probably another situation you don't want to talk about. Your boy Travion Henderson leaves week 16 early with a concussion, and yet we get Ramondre Stevenson in here having a pretty nice game. Runs in a touchdown, was efficient on his carries. Where are we at with Ramondre Stevenson for the trust meter in week 17?
Well, this will depend on Travion Henderson, but I mean, in concussion protocol, normally guys miss a week when that's the case. So I don't know that we're going to see Henderson in the fantasy championship, and that means I'm full trust here on Ramondre Stevenson, Harmon. Like, we saw, he's had moments this year where he's put up decent fantasy stats, and now it looks like he's going to be the dude in this backfield against the Jets defense that we've talked about. Gives up the second most fantasy points to running backs. And I know last week that banged up Saints backfield, they held them in check. That's fine. But we can still go back to the stat that I was preaching last week. The Jets defense has allowed 14 touchdowns to running backs over now their last 6 games. That is still incredible. That is still impressive. And that's still something that we're going to want to target for fantasy. So assuming that Henderson is out, it is full trust on Stevenson as an RB2 and a guy that I could see being one of these heroes in the fantasy championships.
We probably actually did not give this enough credit. You mentioned that's banged up Saints backfield. Chris and I probably didn't talk about this enough when we just emailed through this game, and mostly we talked about Chris Olave and just like, hey, AD Mitchell was able to get some targets, whatever. But yes, there was no running back that went off against the New York Jets for the Saints. However, Taysom Hill kind of had a moment. he had the long touchdown throw to Chris Olave. He had some receptions as well. He was in the backfield, though, on 22% of his snaps, and he had 12 carries for 42 yards. And there were a couple watching that game, like true running back runs, outside zone stuff. So I actually think Taysom Hill having 12 carries for over 40 yards against the Jets, it speaks to that is still a very gettable matchup against that Jets defense. So yeah, Ramondre Stevenson could be one of those guys that he could go from, man, you hate to you hated him all season long because of the Travion Henderson stuff, to he might be like the hero of Week 17. It's a good offense. It's a great matchup against this Jets defense. I'm with you. I have full trust in Stevenson here.
Yeah, I think Stevenson could be one of those guys, and we'll talk about him a little more later, but Taysom Hill could definitely be one of those guys. And it's so funny that it's always this time of year we see guys pop up that haven't done much all season long, and yet they come through when things matter most. And for Taysom Hill, like, he's only topped 3 fantasy points once this season before this game, and then he completely goes off. And now what's stopping him from having another big week here? There's no one coming to save that backfield. Audric Estime played 57-58% of the snaps. He led the running backs in snap share, and yet, yeah, it looks like Taysom Hill is going to have a huge role here. So you look to him as somebody you think about putting in your lineup this week, and you definitely think about putting Ramondre Stevenson in your lineup, even though he's probably also been on your bench for most of the season.
Yeah, I think Stevenson is a good back. I think he's gotten unfairly maligned with Travion Henderson fantasy chatter this year. You mentioned Taysom Hill. He's playing the Titans this week. We're going to finish off this running back section with a Tennessee Titans player, Tyjae Spears. Level of trust in Tyjae Spears, who scored a touchdown this past week. It's also worth noting that Tony Pollard is 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards since week 12. So talk about a guy like that actually might be okay. I don't know how many Tony Pollard teams are available in the playoffs. Like at this point, I'm being a little facetious because you could definitely draft around a bad Tony Pollard draft pick. You could manage around that. But yeah, Tony Pollard doing it when it certainly is way too late here. Where are we at with, we can just group in Titans running backs here. Tyjae Spears, Tony Pollard, any trust on these guys?
I still feel like it's no trust, maybe a little more in Tony Pollard. I mean, for Spears, he's only topped 7 fantasy points in half PPR twice this season. So yeah, like, it was a good game for him. I know, like I mentioned earlier, he was the hero of last year's playoffs, a little bit different scenario where he kind of became the guy down the stretch. This season, that's not the case. Tony Pollard's still getting a lot of work, like you said, but I can't start Spears as anything more than like a risky RB3 flex option. So no trust for me on him. And Pollard, any given week, this is a backfield where, we have 2 running backs sharing the load, where there's going to be weeks where this offense just completely falls apart. For Spears, he's the second back in that backfield. I don't have a lot of trust in these Titans backs. I think if you're in the fantasy championship, it's just too thin of a play. You got to aim higher.
Yeah, I think you're getting way too cute if you're trying to get Tyjae Spears in your lineup. Maybe Tony Pollard, because he has been pretty effective lately, but I don't know. Just feels that also feels pretty thin against the Saints here this week. Let's go to wide receivers. We've got 4 of them who had nice production in Week 16, and we're going to decide if we can trust them. Let's start with Zay Flowers, who... Man, Zay Flowers, what a bizarre player. Talked about it on the recap show last night. Every year you look up, he's one of the most efficient wide receivers on a per route basis. Yards per route run looks great. And then he makes big mistakes. You don't quite feel like you ever remember a big Zay Flowers game. So Zay Flowers, though, last night, despite Lamar Jackson being banged up, he ran a touchdown in. He had a bunch of targets in this one. Where are we at with Zay Flowers on the trust meter?
For me, it's some trust. I mean, obviously, we'd feel better about this if we knew that Lamar Jackson was going to play. I'm not sure that we know where he stands coming off the back injury. I was kind of surprised that he didn't make it back into that game last night. It seems like he should be able to play in this one, but I don't think we can say that for sure yet. If that's the case, if Lamar's out there, then Flowers would be a high-end wide receiver 2 for fantasy. I would feel pretty good about this. I would probably even potentially bump it up closer to full trust because he has been good recently with Lamar. at least 84 yards or a TD in 3 straight games. But then if Lamar can't go, if it's Huntley, it's not the end of the world, because Flowers had 19 targets in the 2 games that Huntley started earlier this year. He came away with 6 for 46, 7 for 63. So again, one of those situations where it's production. It's not week winning production, but it's also not absolute floor where he's crushing your week. But yeah, I'd have a lot harder time believing we're going to see a meaningful performance from him if we don't have Lamar Jackson out there. So we're just going to keep an eye on Lamar's health. We're going to hope that he plays. And if that's the case, I'd probably be willing to bump this up to full trust. But because of the uncertainty around the quarterback situation right now, I'm going to hold it at some trust. Do you feel better about him than I do?
I think some trust is pretty accurate, almost regardless. The one note I would have on the matchup, it's one game, of course, but we're talking about a Packers defense now without Micah Parsons. And I think certainly at times in that game, you felt that this was a defense that was banking on our front seven. Our pass rush is going to be so good that our corners are going to be able to squat on routes. They're going to kind of be able to play a little bit tight to receivers, and we'll live with, some mistakes because we're going to be able to take the quarterback down before they can get the football down the field. And obviously, again, is one play. We're going to talk about TJ Moore here in just a second, but that was one where, oh yeah, you remember, this is not a good cornerback room for the Packers. Like those guys have played well this year, but they've played well because of some of the stuff that Micah Parsons was able to afford for this team. So that's just something to note when we're talking about the Packers matchup in these next couple of weeks for wide receivers. Let's go to Jacksonville and let's talk about Parker Washington, who, dude, what a baller. This guy's a good, like this guy's a good football player. I know the Jaguars have tried to replace him a bajillion times, but he's good, man. And I liked him as a prospect, as like a day 3 sleeper type. And he has really been a nice player for this team. Just pops up every, few weeks for big games. He's obviously healthier now. What's our level of trust on Parker Washington, who was able to take advantage of a favorable matchup to slot receivers for the Broncos?
Yeah, 6 catches, 145 yards, and a touchdown this weekend. Another one that was tough to see coming. Some trust, though, still for me. I can't go full trust by any means. I know this offense has been playing so well, but there's so many weapons that they can use in this offense. And I think this matchup maybe favored Parker a little bit more just because, you had the strong play on the outside. He could go to work where we talked about it. BTJ was going to have a hard matchup on the outside, right? So I think Washington was able to capitalize on that in this matchup. But yeah, there's so many guys in this offense that from week to week, it could be spread around. We're going to see other guys step up. I don't think we're going to see anything like this performance from him. So a guy that I feel really excited to have in Dynasty, some of those deeper Dynasty leagues I've talked about where you start 5 receivers. He's that kind of guy you could put in that 5th spot and you get that big game, like you said, once in a while, and it really helps. But I don't know that we're going to see a bunch of these games from Washington now that we have everybody back healthy, right? Even though Trevor Lawrence is playing out of his mind, and congratulations to him coming through in a really tough matchup here against the Broncos. But you have BTJ, you have Jacoby Myers getting that new contract. He's the guy in this offense. Now, you have Brenton Strange now healthy. Like, there's so many weapons. Travis Etienne in the backfield. Like, I just don't think we can have faith that Washington's going to get 10 targets most often. I think it's going to happen periodically, but it's not going to happen often enough that you can have full trust in him.
Yeah, and Brian Thomas obviously got the shadow coverage from Patrick Surtain, which, that was kind of the way it's, even just from an alignment perspective, that's sort of, it made sense to me. Like, hey, you could just stick Surtain on Jacoby Myers and see how that goes. But because BTJ is so stationary, he's that X receiver, it's just much easier to stick him on there. Now, they did move him around a little bit. There was even a couple times where Surtain was on Parker Washington and, the throw just wasn't there. So it wasn't just an all out situation, but I would say that BTJ against this Colts secondary, which we're going to see play tonight. So again, we'll see what happens, but he could potentially have some bigger plays there because he has made some big plays since he's moved to kind of an X receiver only role. So yeah, I think Parker Washington, difficult player to trust. I think some trust to honestly no trust might be the way I'd go there. I think the offense flows through Jacoby Myers and he's the clear, like, number 1 target on the team.
Yeah, agreed. I think he's an intriguing guy, and I think Washington you could look at as like a wide receiver 4 flex option, but not much higher than that, even though he had the great performance here.
Next player up here, Quentin Johnston had the big game against the Dallas Cowboys as Justin Herbert had just one of the best quarterback games of the entire season. Was absolutely electric against the Dallas Cowboys and made the pen meter a little bit more uncomfortable. Lad McConkey also scored here. We haven't talked about the pen meter in a while.
I didn't
but
realize
as of right now. Yeah, we have not talked about this in a minute here, but it is getting a little bit tight. If we can show the current standings here for the pen meter, we've got Lad McConkey is, I believe, wide receiver 24 on the season. Quentin Johnston, wide receiver 30. So I am certainly in danger of hey, Quentin Johnston has 3 touchdowns in week 17 to potentially end this thing for me. It could happen. You never know. We're definitely roasting here a little bit. I might have to sauce this bad boy up here at some point after the season, but we'll see. What's your level of trust on? What a treat. Let's go, Lad. Let's set this thing up here, man. Come on. All right. What's your level of trust on Quentin Johnston?
Well, you'll be happy to hear that I have no trust in Quentin Johnston here. He's
right.
coming off a great game, but look at the matchups, right? Like he's going against the Cowboys. They're going to have the most fantasy points to receivers. Now he's got to turn around and switch that up, and it's not going to be the case against the Texans, right? On top of the fact that Chargers banged up offensive line is going to have to deal with the Texans pass rush. I think that's going to disrupt a lot of things for them. And Houston, 31st in terms of fantasy points allowed to receivers, the second worst matchup. So completely from one end to the other here, I don't think you can have faith at all. It's no trust for me.
I think that's the correct answer. Even just go back to that playoff game that these teams had last year. Quentin Johnston kind of got obliterated in that game because the Texans secondary plays so physical. Now, I think QJ is a little bit better of a player than he was at the end of last season, but nevertheless, I think that could again be what happens here. And if this game's going to go anywhere, it's going to be because Lad McConkey had a couple of big plays here for the Texans. So I agree. I think no trust here on Quentin Johnston. Last player in this section, mentioned him earlier, DJ Moore. Where are we at with DJ Moore on the trust meter?
I want to hedge my bet a little bit because we don't know if Luther Burden is going to play or not here. So if Luther Burden is playing, then I would say some trust. If Luther Burden is out for this game, then it's full trust because I think DJ Moore coming on the last couple of weeks has really been about all the injuries in that receiving core. Before that, they really didn't seem that interested in making him a focal point of the passing attack. And now they've really had no choice. And he's shown he still has more than enough talent to get it done. He's been really, really good for fantasy in these last 2 games. And I think if Burden's out, that's going to continue. And maybe we'll think back about DJ Moore being one of those guys that really help people get to fantasy championships and potentially win it. So if Burden's out, then DJ Moore is a fantasy wide receiver too. If Burden comes back, then it's going to be close. They'll probably both be in the wide receiver 3 kind of range. But yeah, it's been great. I've just been really happy, like even to see like that interview after the game and the excitement, because he's had a bit of a strange year, right? He's had a bit of a strange couple years, but this year with things starting to go better there, you really hoped that he would be a little happier, and still at times he was taking a bit of a backseat in the offense. So it was awesome to see him make that catch at the end and celebrate the way that they did. And the Bears are just one of the best stories in the league right now, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was talking about this earlier today with James Coe that I was really happy to see that for DJ too. One, because you get to see like DJ is just a very unique guy. He kind of just says what's on his mind. And that post-game interview, he was just so I've talked to DJ a few times over the years, even before he got drafted. I did an interview with him when he was just a prospect. And he's just like a guy who pretty much just says what's on his mind. And he was very, from again, my limited experience, I'm not going to say we're like friends or anything, but my experience with him, that was very authentically himself. Just in that interview, even as the guy comes up, the reporter comes up to me, he's just like, yeah, what's up? Like, what do you mean, what's up? Like, he just made the game-winning touchdown. Like, yeah, what's up? I don't know. It was something about it was cool to see for DJ. I would almost contend, though, that Luther Burden's presence does not really matter here because obviously, like, yeah, not having another eligible target player, sure, but they still spread the ball around, like, in this game. And it's basically, if you are counting on DJ Moore, you're basically just counting on him making big plays here. He was only targeted on 20% of his routes. He obviously made the big play that won the game. He had a couple of other big catches too. You're just kind of counting on those because that's who he's been for this team. He's been sort of the deep guy, which is a weird use of his role, but still the deep guy. And look, he's playing against the San Francisco 49ers team that's definitely banged up. So I think almost regardless, you can trust DJ.
Yeah, we'll see. The 49ers obviously play Monday night tonight. We'll see what they can do in that game. But their defense hasn't been scary this year. And if anything, you want to pass against them. They've played the Browns and the Titans recently. So maybe people aren't paying attention to the fact that, their defense isn't quite what it used to be and kind of how bad they've been for part of the season. But you can throw on them. We'll see if Phillip Rivers can throw on them. I'm not sure about that. So maybe it'll be another scenario where they have kind of a decent looking game on the stat sheet and people aren't paying attention to the fact that they're so banged up. But I think a team like the Bears is going to be able to move the ball through the air against the 49ers, and DJ Moore is going to be a big part of that. And I'm glad to hear it, Harmon, because one of those dynasty leagues where you start 5-man, I've lost Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill and Travis Hunter, and DJ Moore has emerged now as my wide receiver 1 on that team. So we kind of need him to keep it going.
So crazy. It's just funny how the fantasy season goes with a lot of these twists and turns. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk some fantasy headaches. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we're back. We're getting into some fantasy headaches here from week 16. We're actually focusing on the NFC South Invitational from this past week. We're going to start with the Buccaneers offense. We've got 4 players to talk about here, starting with Baker Mayfield. What is your level of trust with Baker Mayfield after it's not been a good season? It wasn't a good week 16. Where are we at with Baker?
Baker hasn't finished higher than QB 14 in his last 5 games here. So
yeah,
man, if it wasn't for his matchup, it would be your cooked bro. But because of the matchup, I'm going to say no trust. I'm going to give him like that little bit of benefit of the doubt. And the last couple of games, he's had his full complement of weapons. Like, he's been right there. They seem to want to run the ball more, which hurts his passing attack. But he gets the Dolphins, and the Dolphins just let Joe Burrow have that bounce back game against them. 309 yards, 4 touchdowns. So it's tough to count Baker out, but I think he's just a risky QB2 streamer who, for me, it's no trust in the fantasy championships.
Man, Boone, we talk about this episode a lot. The first one that you did on the show, which was, contrarian corner. What if the Lions actually face some struggles in the absence of Ben Johnson? We also talked about the Bucs on that episode, I believe, and like we're long into the season now, and it just doesn't get discussed enough that this team does not have Liam Cohen, and it feels like it, right? It essentially feels that we have, a team that doesn't have that elite play caller that it did last year. Whether it was, hey, we're going to call a screen here that's going to get big production, we're going to get guys wide open. It just doesn't feel as easy as it did last year. And you can, this happens all the time. Well, we'll just promote the next guy, right? We'll just promote the passing game coordinator, Josh Grizzard. I don't think I watch this offense and think, oh my God, Grizzard is doing this, what an idiot, or any of that stuff. But there's just like even if you lose like 10 to 20% of the juice that your last coordinator brought, it can be like 10 to 20%. It's a big deal in the NFL when we're trying to, compete, when you're also dealing with injuries too. That's been a whole thing. So I just at this point think that I think this Bucs offense is cooked. Like, if I could give a spoiler alert take for almost all these players, I think they're cooked. Even in this matchup against the Dolphins, like, I just haven't seen anything, certainly from Baker in isolation, where I'd be like, oh yeah, it's just a matchup with the Dolphins that's going to fix everything. I feel pretty untrustworthy of Baker Mayfield this week.
Yeah, and that's where I am, right? It's no trust in my mind. It hasn't looked good. I think the injuries are like the biggest part of what's kind of taken down this offense this year. And it's not just all the different guys who've missed time, because there's been a bunch of the weapons there that have missed time. It was Bucky Irving or Chris Godwin. Obviously, Mike Evans missed a bunch of time. Emeka Egbuka, we're going to talk about him. His kind of downfall seems tied to when he had that hamstring injury. It's kind of weird to suggest that, but it kind of seemed to have happened around the same time. But there's a few different things going on with him. Regardless, like, the offensive line, I think, is maybe one of the biggest things that people don't talk about here, that they've dealt with so many injuries on the offensive line. And that I think that is a huge problem. So it's been a tough year, a lot of change, a lot of injuries. And early in the season, they were able to overcome it. Lately, it has not been the case whatsoever, and they are sort of just limping to the finish line almost quite literally because of some of these injuries.
It's a great point about the offensive line. Even Graham Barton, who has played all year, I don't think he's been as good as he was last season. He was one of the best centers in the league as a rookie. And then obviously, Tristan Wirfs is banged up. He misses the first month of the season. They kick Barton out to left tackle. You just wonder if he's ever been comfortable then moving back to center. There's just all these things. We just want to pretend like these are numbers on a spreadsheet, and when they're out there, they're out there. But it's just not that simple. And I think that's how this Tampa Bay team has gone this year. Let's talk about, though, some of the individual players here as people are making lineup decisions for Week 17. Let's talk about Mike Evans. What is your level of trust on Mike Evans?
This is going to seem weird to say based on what I just said, but I think Mike Evans, I do have full trust in. He's come back over these last two games, 130 yards 2 weeks ago in the first game back. This week, he scores a touchdown. He's continuing to produce for fantasy. Now he gets that Dolphins defense that people are going to look at. This fantasy manager is going to look at it. They're going to see that the Dolphins defense is a bad matchup. It looks red on Yahoo, right? Oh no, they're allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but guys have been getting home against them. I mean, last week, Jamar Chase, over 100 yards. T. Higgins, 53 yards and a touchdown. The week before that, Chris Olave, Devon Vele, they both found the end zone here. So I have faith that Mike Evans is going to be able to continue to get this done, whether it is lower yardage totals, but finding the end zone or some big plays. I think he's going to be okay, but he might honestly be the only guy in this offense that I feel that way about, not to spoil the next two players from this team that we're going to talk about.
No, I agree that he's the only one I'd give the full trust designation to. I guess I fully trust that Chris Godwin's going to lead the team in routes the rest of the way because he has in back-to-back weeks with everybody back, but obviously not somebody you're playing in fantasy at this point. Mike Evans' route participation did jump up to 80%. He was targeted on 38% of those routes. So that's great to see. And just that alone, I think makes him a fantasy starter for this week. And you're either hoping for big plays or you're hoping for touchdowns here. Let's get to Emeka Egbuka here. I'll just say this one for you. I think we can both agree. This is you are cooked, bro. And you've probably been cooked for much longer than Matt Harmon has wanted to admit it. And I think that at this point, 50% route participation this past week, below Jalen McMillan. I think that's a little bizarre. I think that's that's strange to see that. I don't know what the reason is. But the reality is, he's a guy that I think he actually played pretty well in week 15 on Thursday night. It was pretty efficient with his opportunities, but yeah, for whatever reason, they're rotating this room right now. Chris Godwin is playing a ton and Emeka Egbuka is not. And you can't be playing the fourth receiver on an offense that's struggling in your fantasy football finals, period, end of story.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where you wonder if we could add something beyond cooked, because I could say the stat. We can update the stat every week, Harmon. It's now under 10 fantasy points in 9 of his last 10 games. And it's actually under 9 half PPR fantasy points in 9 of his last 10 games. Just brutal stuff. And you mentioned it, 4th on the team in routes run, 4th in targets among the receivers too. It's not just that he's not out there as much. He's just not getting the same opportunities that he was earlier in the season. And of course, they've gotten healthier and some of these guys have come back. Basically, everyone's come back in that receiving core. But this is one where, there's no real point to do this now because we're so late in the season. And like you said, weeks ago, we were telling, or at least I was telling people, get this guy out of your lineup. It's not the same player that we had early in the year. But this is one where in the offseason, I want to go look at this. I want to do more of a deep dive and try to figure out what happened to this player and how are we going to value this guy for things like Dynasty moving forward, where in the first month of the season, it seemed like he was going to be a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty and one of the pieces that you'd want to get. And now it's kind of completely up in the air. So I want to figure out, maybe there's something going on behind the scenes we don't know about. I mentioned that injury that he had where he just kind of tried to play through a hamstring issue, but normally hamstring injuries aren't really the thing that you think lingers and derails a guy's season. And I don't know if he's just tried to power through Josh Jacobs style and it's kind of really hurt him. But man, this is not the same player that we had earlier in the year. I'm still hopeful about his career. I still think he's going to be a good receiver, but to see him now fall behind Jalen McMillan, that's telling me there's something more going on in this offense, whether it's injury, whether it's something behind the scenes, that we just don't have one of these variables to account for on why he's not getting the kind of playing time that he was getting early in the season. And obviously hasn't been producing that way in 2.5 months.
And I think all that context is good. And like you said, we'll have a lot of time to kind of unpack this over the course of the offseason, kind of retrospect analysis, the whole deal. I do think I'm also willing to, at this point, go back to the prospect profile on the player. And, it's just funny. Like if he had those big games at the end of this, at the beginning that he had at the beginning of the season, if he's having them right now, he would be on that like clear rocket ship. He's a 2nd-round pick next year, the whole deal. But I think that when we're talking about him now going forward, I'm at least willing to go back to the prospect profile, at least like my prospect profile on him, which was, he was going to be a good player, a high floor player. And I do think he will be a good player in the NFL in the long term. Like, I don't think he's bad or anything, but is he the next like superstar receiver? He wasn't for me necessarily a player that, again, I evaluate him as a very high floor player. And, then he sort of maybe cranks those expectations up based on what he did in the first month of the season. Maybe that was just like a random stretch, it's totally possible. Yeah. So I'm at least willing to kind of investigate that in my mind as we are going forward on Ibuka, but certainly not somebody you can play in week 17 lineups. That is for sure. A player that I think people will be wondering if they can play in week 17 is Bucky Irving, who Bucky Irving was good on the ground against the Panthers, but have been talking about this for a minute now. He's kind of banged in terms of a fantasy role. He doesn't get goal line work. They go to Sean Tucker down there. Rashad White is involved as well. He gets some pass catching duties. So where are we at with Bucky Irving, like on the trust meter? And can you start this guy in fantasy football championship matchups? And I ask you that as somebody that will have a Bucky Irving team in the fantasy football championship lineups.
Yeah, it's going to come down to your options because he's in that range where you could look at other guys, even some of the guys on the waiver wire. For me, he's going to be a low end RB2. I have no trust at this point in him for a lot of the reasons that you outlined there, that his role in this offense is not great for fantasy. We know now that Tucker's going to take those goal line carries. So what you're left with is like a talented runner. I think we agree that we really like Bucky Irving. I don't know. Maybe he's not totally 100%. It seems like he's okay out there. It just seems like they want to use all these guys and that the overall offense just isn't as efficient as we've seen it be in the past. So you need him to like break a long play to really have that notable fantasy day. And that's hard to count on. So yeah, he's down in like the low end RB2 range. And I would not blame anybody, including yourself, if you want to potentially push him aside for even some of the names that we're going to talk about a little later in the waiver section.
Yeah, I mean, this team that I have that has Bucky Irving, I've got Ramondre Stevenson sitting on the bench. I'll be looking at Stevenson over Bucky Irving if there's no Travion Henderson. And it's just, I don't think there's anything about like he doesn't look right or this, that, and the other. Maybe they don't want to put too much on him. Remember, there were those like, mental concerns for him coming back from the injury. Maybe there's something there. I also just think the reality is like, you can be as good as you want to be at the running back position, but if you're not going to have goal line work and you're not going to have pass catching work, it's just really hard to score fantasy points. Like that's just the math of the game. You need to catch passes if you're in a half PPR or a PPR format, and you need to score touchdowns because that's where the big plays come from. And for Bucky Irving, this is a team that is struggling to create big plays, right? They don't have Liam Cohen just saying like, all right, we're in a second and 7 here. Let's push the Bucky Irving screen pass for 15 yards. Let's just push that button over and over again. They're not doing that this year. So there's none of those big plays in the offense, which is what Bucky Irving needs right now. So yeah, I really don't think it's a Bucky issue. I don't think it's this. I just think it's a structural thing. And just like the way fantasy points are scored, he's in a pretty tough spot right now, and I just think that like is what it is. Last situation to talk about here is the Panthers running backs. Let's talk about this headache here. It's a headache, Boone. Let's just say both players. Like I think we have the same designation here. Where are the Panthers running backs at on the trust meter?
Yeah, instead of a "you're cooked, bro," we can just go "they are cooked, bro," because that is where I'm putting both of them, and I think you're agreeing with me. Yeah, like neither one of these guys have topped 55 scrimmage yards in either of the last 2 games. And it's like you said, your role really has a huge impact on what you can do from a fantasy perspective. I think both these guys are good backs. And yet now we're seeing them split this backfield. They're going to go against a very tough Seahawks defense that's given up the 6th fewest fantasy points to running backs. That's the matchup in the fantasy championship. I don't think you can have any faith in these guys in your lineup. So yeah, it pushes them down even further than we were already pushing them down because of this split and some of the uncertainty week to week and the hot hand approach. But the reality is the last 2 weeks, neither guy's had the hot hand.
No, yeah, the rushing efficiency just hasn't been there, and luckily the Panthers' passing game has been able to take advantage of that. At least they did last week against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bryce Young was pretty good throwing the football down the field off of some play action, so that was good to see. That's kind of what this offense needs to do at this point. It's just. I mean, I think you can maybe play Rico Dowdle of the two, but you're pretty cooked. Hopefully you have a better option than Rico Dowdle because, you're just kind of hoping that he gets the goal line work, stuff like that, and this is going to be a tough matchup against that Seahawks defense. All right, we are going to take another quick break. When we come back, we're going to run through our waiver wire Justin Boone's waiver wire selections heading into Week 17. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we're back. It's time. I truly don't know why I said our waiver wire selections before the break because I have done zero work when it comes to picking players for the waiver wire section. That's all our guy, Justin Boone. He writes the whole article. Make sure you're reading it on the website. Are you doing a Week 18 waiver wire, Boone? Are they making you do that, or does it stop after this?
I will not be. We will be shifting to other content for Week 18. So, lots of work coming out, but this was the last waiver wire that went up today. And then, of course, as always, I'll update it on Tuesday. But no, Harmon, it's the season of giving. I'm happy to share this with you. This is our waiver wire, man. Let's do it together.
We can talk about it together, but I will take no credit when it comes to any of this. Let's get into the quarterback position, talk about 4 players you are encouraging the people to add here. Although I will definitely point to the second player on this list. Pretty interesting little quarterback down there in New Orleans there, Justin Boone. But anyways, take it away. Who are the 4 players people should add this week at quarterback?
I started giving you your props last week on this one. We will definitely continue this week. But starting with these 4, Sam Darnold at the Panthers. He's just over that 50% rostered mark. A top 10 fantasy quarterback in 2 of the last 3 weeks. We just saw him accomplish that feat against the Rams, which is a tough matchup. So he can definitely do it against Carolina. Though also they're kind of a tricky opponent for fantasy quarterbacks. The one that you want to talk about is Tyler Shuck, and he gets another good matchup here against the Titans. He looks comfortable in this offense, Harmon. And I think now we can look at this guy. Even last week, I was still kind of pushing back on the idea that he was going to be the week 1 starter next year. I was wrong. Yeah, he looks like he deserves to be the week 1 starter next year. And I don't know if they'll even need to bring in competition because, he looks good in this offense. And you think about it, like, despite having Rashid Shaheed traded away at the deadline, despite having Alvin Kamara hurt and Devon Vele hurt, he keeps putting up these pretty decent performances in real life and in fantasy over the last month, right? He's finished as the QB 12, the QB 6, the QB 16, and he currently sits as the QB 14 with just Monday Night Football left to be played. So, those numbers don't mean he has to be like a must add off the waiver wire, but he is certainly a guy that you can grab and start this week if you have any concerns about the guy that you're playing. And then the other ones we don't really need to talk about here. JJ McCarthy playing the Lions. We're going to have to check on his health all week and whether he's going to be able to go in that game, but we've seen him have a couple good performances fantasy-wise, and the matchup's all right. And then we're really digging deep if we're talking about Geno Smith playing the Giants, but the matchup is good, and Geno had a bit of a better game this week, so maybe he can come through in an easy spot there.
In a revenge game for Geno Smith. Never forget that Geno Smith was the one to break Eli Manning's start streak.
I feel like I did. I'm always about the revenge games. I feel like I did forget about that. Wow, yeah. Good call.
I don't think anybody could blame you if you forgot about the storied Geno Smith New York Giants era. Let's get to the running back position here. Anybody worth adding as we head into Week 17?
Yeah, I think all these guys are kind of interesting. We're going to talk about Michael Carter again, and I know we talked about him last week, and he really didn't come through. But this week, he gets the Bengals. So the 65 scoreless yards last week, it wasn't what we wanted, but don't hold that against him because this matchup against Cincinnati is fantastic. They're going to have the most fantasy points to running backs, including at least 100 scrimmage yards or a touchdown to 6 different backs over the last 4 weeks. So they're just hemorrhaging fantasy points to running backs. I think you could go back to Carter here as an RB2 in fantasy. Blake Corum, he plays the Falcons. We know how good he's been, even though he's still kind of playing that complimentary role behind Kyron Williams, but he's finished as a top 20 RB in 4 consecutive outings here. He's found the end zone 5 times during that span, and he's posted yardage totals at 81, 131, 71, and 61. I don't know why they all end in ones, but they are all good for fantasy. you are happy to have him in your lineup as a high-end RB3 with RB2 upside. Emmanuel Wilson, we'll go back to that conversation that we had earlier talking about Josh Jacobs. Will Josh Jacobs continue to play through this? Will the Packers actually sit him down, which I think at this point would be the smart move? Either way, we saw Jacobs out there this week, and we saw them eventually give the touches to Wilson, and we saw Wilson come through with over 80 yards. And I mentioned that stat earlier where he's had 4 games where he's played at least 40% of the snaps. He's performed well fantasy-wise in all of them. So if he gets that opportunity, he's going to be in your lineup as an RB2. I think you want to pick him up and stash him. And then we saw Quinshon Judkins get hurt this week, so that opens up an opportunity in the Browns backfield. Dylan Sampson wasn't even able to practice last week. We'll see if he's able to get out there and practice this week. He would be the guy to stash if he can play. If he can't go, then Raheem Rocket Sanders is the guy you could look at as the early down back there. Travion Williams would be the passing down back. That would kind of cap those guys because Sampson's someone who can come in and actually could consolidate all of it. We've seen him do that a couple times this year where he's gotten more opportunities, including going back to week 1 before Judkins had signed his contract. So Sampson, a guy to stash. If you really need to go deep and you're really desperate, maybe Rocket Sanders as well.
Yeah, I'm really not that jacked up about the Browns' run game without Quinshon Judkins. It wasn't a good run game with him. But because Dylan Sampson could legitimately come in here and catch 6 to 8 passes in this game, I think he makes it for like any sort of PPR league would make himself interesting in that one. Like the Steelers front 7 against the Browns, that could necessitate getting the football out pretty quick for Shedeur Sanders there. Okay, let's go to wide receiver here. We've got 4 interesting names to discuss.
Yeah, we're going through these quick because we're talking about fantasy championship pickups, right? If you've made it to the fantasy championship, you know what you're doing. You're not really digging too deep necessarily, although there were a lot of injuries this week. But at receiver, Troy Franklin, he's facing the Chiefs, and Pat Bryant, really scary situation there. Let's hope he's okay. But we know whenever Bryant's out of the lineup, that opens things up for Franklin, and it really looks like Pat Bryant is not going to be back this season, or at least in the next couple weeks. So Franklin, 6 for 85 and a touchdown, 4 for 66. Those are his last 2 performances here, and the Chiefs defense looks like they've just packed it up on the season. So Franklin, a wide receiver 3 flex option. Parker Washington, who we talked about earlier, had the really big game. I don't think you could chase those kind of numbers, but I think he can be that wide receiver 4 flex option for you. Luther Burden, I think you should stash. I don't know if he's going to come back and actually play this week, but we saw him performing pretty well before he got hurt. So if he can get back on the practice field, if he gets out there in this game, he's a wide receiver 3 flex option potentially. And then Jalen Coker, we throw him in there. We like to put a 4th one. We love Jalen Coker. He's doing well here. You know, his last 3 games, 4 for 74 and a touchdown, 4 for 16 a touchdown. This week, a little lower, 3 for 47, but he's producing. He's showing that he can be a meaningful part of that offense, and he can sneak into fantasy lineups in that wide receiver 4 flex range as well.
Yeah, you don't need that last roster spot. Just stick Jalen Coker on the end of your bench and get him a fantasy title. You know, that's what I'm going to be doing for my fantasy championship rosters here. If he's on the waiver wire, I want him to get a ceremonial win here. But I would say for the other 3 guys, I'll just give you a quick kind of ranking on these players. I'd probably go, let's assume Burden plays. I think Troy Franklin is the clear best option. I trust the most that he's going to be on the field. I like the matchup there for him. He's been productive, as you mentioned, with that Pat Bryant. A little bit tough between Parker Washington and Luther Burden, but I think I'd go Luther Burden, then Parker Washington, just kind of thinking about how both offenses are really crowded. But yeah, I do think that Burden, if he is back, pretty good matchup against that Niners team, and his explosiveness has certainly been evident of late.
Yeah, definitely. And we can keep moving here to tight end too. There's not a lot we have to talk about. Brenton Strange, Dalton Schultz, Colston Loveland. One of the exciting things is that we don't have to talk about Harold Fannin. Finally, he's over that 50% rostered mark. So yeah, we did it, Harmon. It took till week 17, but we did it. Taysom Hill is that one player that I think people could consider this week. We talked about it earlier in the show. Audric Estime leads the backfield with 58% of the snaps. But Hill was really the guy that they were using in that game plan, the jack of all trades, 12 carries, 42 yards, catches 4 passes for 36 yards, and then also throws that 38-yard touchdown. And that was after, like I said earlier, only top 3 fantasy points once in all the prior games this season. So kind of out of nowhere. but nice to see him performing. And given the state of the tight end position, it's going to be pretty tough to not rank him as a top 12 option in fantasy this week. So pay attention. My rankings will come out on Tuesday where I actually end up putting him, but I feel like he's going to be inside that top 12 and somebody that he's always boom or bust. He's always volatile, but you could certainly consider him.
And I will just offer the people a personal apology for the folks who followed my ranking on Colson Loveland last week. I was really excited about Loveland without Burden and Odunze, and it just really didn't happen. He ran a route on 81% of the dropbacks, which is good for your route participation fantasy leagues, but otherwise 3 catches for 30 yards. Not a ton there, which was certainly a bummer for Colson Loveland. I started Colson Loveland, so I followed my own bad advice. It ended up okay. Team still won, so don't worry about it. But yeah, I certainly don't like looking. I certainly don't like looking at. I actually made the choice between Colson Loveland and Brenton Strange, and I picked incorrectly. So I'll probably be going back to Strange this next week, which means Colson Loveland will have the big week in week 17. That's just how it goes. Okay, let's finish it up with a deep stash. First time ever in the deep stash category here, Justin Boone. Let's hear it.
Yeah, we got to make history here in the final week of the waiver wire section. Charlie Smith at the Titans. This is the Saints kicker that I am talking about. This is not a 4th string running back who's going to get a starting opportunity. No, we're going with a kicker here. This dude has been nails the last couple of weeks, right? 10 points in week 15, 20 points in week 16. He's the number 1 fantasy kicker on the week with just Monday Night Football left to go, and he gets another great matchup in week 17. The Titans, they're a plus spot for kickers, but they've also given up more than 10 fantasy points in 5 of their last 7 games when it comes to kickers. So don't be surprised if he is a factor again. You could look to pick him up, and he is available in 99% of leagues. So consider grabbing him as your kicker this week.
Look at that. We've made history here on the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast waiver wire selection. Finally have talked about a kicker right here. We got it in at the deadline. Boone, appreciate you, buddy. This is a great show. It will not be too long until we see you again because you're going to be back this week earlier than usual for the preview episode.
Absolutely. The most important week to figure everything out. We're going to try to do that in the preview show.
And we're going to try to do it in a kind of compact schedule here this week. More details on
around
that to come. Yes, it is what it is. For tomorrow, though, we will be back. Tuesday, Ray Garvin joins me for a special edition of the pod. We're going to preview the Christmas Day and the Saturday slate of games here. So that's 5 games that have players that matter in your fantasy titles. So be on the lookout for that. 5 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be live right here on this YouTube channel. We will see you then. Until then, we are out.